We are taking some time to study through the book of 1 John, and this week we're into 1 John chapter 5. If you want to turn in the guest Bibles there, or the Bibles that you brought with you, page 1903 if you're using one of the guest Bibles. Over the last few weeks, we've been getting to know our loving God. Last week we took the turn, and chapter 4 really focused on that truth. In both 1 John chapter 4, verse 8 and verse 16, it uses those three words, God is love. Not as a descriptive of God, God is loving, or He is someone who chooses to love, but as an expression, God is love. When that truth permeates us, we realize that we know a loving God. If you think of the Greeks, you think of other ancient civilizations, the God that they would serve, or the gods that they would serve, were not characterized as loving gods. And our God could be not necessarily a loving God, true? He could demand that we do the things that we do. He could make us do the things that we do. He could express Himself in a variety of ways, but yet the Bible affirms that God is love. That is, He has always been, He will always be, and He can be nothing but love. He makes that His essential nature in Father, Son, and Spirit. In our own experiences, we know that love is complex, don't we? Even in our side of things. Much of our life is spent looking for love, appreciating love, understanding love, accepting love, offering love, being more loving, repairing relationships when we haven't been loving. In all of this, we need to realize and feel the truth that God is love. There's been a few times in our oversight meeting, Dick and I have had a conversation about that a lot of our information is information. It's for the head, but what about those that feel truth? What about when it's not the thought of it, but it's the knowledge of it. It's the experience of it. Well, today's sermon is more geared towards the truth that permeates the heart. God is love. Don't just know that, but feel that, but experience that. But let that be a motivator in all that we do. So if God is love, how do we show love back towards God? God is love, and He has enabled us to be loving. We probably like that side of it. That the love that we share with others comes from God. There's a second part of it. He has commanded us to be loving. So if your head's not quite there, if your heart's not quite there, do it anyways. There's the command to love God and to love others, where it becomes not optional. I was thinking of some of the quotes, trying to find some quotes to get us started about love. I was thinking, could have songs from each genre and their quotes of love, and that would be kind of interesting. When I came across this one, and I stopped there. It says, I like not only to be loved, but also to be told I am loved. That one hit me as the head and the heart. Not just know that I'm loved, but to be told that I'm loved. And this was written by George Eliot, which actually wasn't George Eliot. It was the pen name of a lady. Wrote during the Victorian era and influenced lots of people, but couldn't do it as a woman. Wrote it under a man's name, and people accepted it. I think that was a sneaky one. You see why it speaks to the head and the heart? But then I thought, what about God? I thought in my own life. In our family, we say, I love you a lot, and we realize that many people don't have that as a part of our lives. But the next part was, how often do I tell God that I love Him? I thank him for being loving. I tell others that he's a loving God, but I have room for improvement here. So from starting to write this, I've been adding this into my prayers and conversations and thought about God. I love you. It seemed a little weird at first. Such a truth, but I think he likes it. The context of what's going on in 1 John chapter 5. In chapter 4, it connects us with a God who is love. In chapter 5, 1 through 12, today's text, it shows us how we can show our love towards God. The context of the call to love comes from the damage that's been caused by false teachers called Gnostics, who have devalued Jesus by separating his humanity and his divinity. They don't mind God being divine, but they don't want him to be human. And they are then teaching others that your humanity is going to lead you into trouble, or that God doesn't really care what you do with your body because he's already has contact with your soul. Accepting Jesus as fully God and fully man is essential in a relationship with the Father, and accepting the blessed eternal life that comes through Jesus. John is very upset, very bothered by this false teaching because it's separating people from a loving God. It's not valuing Jesus for who he is and his essential nature in an eternal relationship. He's concerned if they follow this path, they're going to end up away from God, not near him. As we read the section, we're going to notice that loving God comes down to two main actions. Now we get into the head side of John, because John has already been told this by Jesus back in the gospel. And it comes down to two actions in this section. If you're going to love God, it means loving Jesus and God's adopted children. He doesn't use the word adopted, but it's God's children. If you're going to try to show love back towards God, Jesus is first, but so are the other children, the adopted ones. Do you like the second one? Pretty short answer. How do you show love to God? You will obey my commands. He doesn't say you'll think about it or you'll work on it, but if you're going to love God, it means obedience to my commands. John heard this from Jesus. John passes it on as he speaks to his audience as well. These are the aspects that we can grow in as we show our love towards God. Every time, any generation, any culture, here are ways that we can express our love back towards God. So let's read John chapter 5, 1 through 12, and notice some of the parts that come up in here. We're going to start with the first 5 verses. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves his child as well. Notice a couple things I pointed out there. Everyone's. Is statement 1 a salvation statement? No. But he is saying if you don't connect to Jesus, you're not going to be obedient to anything else. Everyone that believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. Because the Gnostics were saying you don't have to believe in Jesus. You just have to trust this other truth. John reminds them you can't have a relationship with God without the Son. Everyone who loves the Father loves his child as well. That's our call to love God and love Jesus. But it goes beyond that. In verse 2 he says, this is how we know that we love the children of God. Not just child of God, the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. This is love for God, to obey his commands. And his commands are not burdensome. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. I pointed out believes in that section as well. Because remember, John is speaking to an audience that is being swayed by false teachers. The false teachers are saying, we have this knowledge. John says, you believe this. Here's what you know is true and how that impacts them. The biggest part of our sermon today, and the application of it, is going to come from these 5 verses. There are so many points in here that are worthwhile taking a look at, and so I've put together some notes on those 5 verses in particular. Verse 1, we find out that the Father and Son go together. True? They're a package deal. If you want a relationship with God, you have to have a relationship with the Son. So there are 4 concepts. There's something wrong there. 4 concepts addressed here that still need addressed today. The first one is the Gnostics were trying to offer a relationship with God without Jesus. That didn't work then. Does it work today? No. Do you remember John 14:6? I am the way and the truth and the life. What's the next part? No one comes to the Father except through me. That's still true. You can't say, well, I believe in God, but I don't need Jesus. That truth just doesn't work. 1 John really points that out. The connection between Father and Son, they are together. It is one God. Another truth that I think that gets overlooked, too often missed, is the call to love the children of God, His church, as a part of the expression of loving God. Do they go together as well? Can you love God and God the Father and God the Son and not love His children? He says no. If you're going to love, you need to be connected to a church. You need to be loving the children as well. This is how you show love to God, to love His children. You need to be part of something bigger than yourself. Loving God involves obedience to His suggestions. What's the word there? Do you see how specific He is when He says it? He says, these are my commands. Well, we know that because loving obedience is a key component in our relationships, isn't it? To show love is to show submission, to show connection, to show obedience. It's true in the home, in school, at work, with any people in authority. There are multiple passages that talk about this living in proper submission to God and to others, about a surrendered life. Do you think John has a few things that he learned from Jesus about God's commands? Well, here's a few of the passages just in John where it says, obey my commands. These are the ones just in John. John 12:50, 13:34 and 35. What's the command in 13:34 and 35? My command is that you love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. 14:15, 21, 23, and on it goes. And then he mentions a few in 1 John, which we've already read. In chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5. And if you didn't get the point, in 2 John, he says it again in chapter 1, 5, and 6. These are just the ones from John. God expects you to know His commands and be obedient to them. And they are not burdensome, because God calls us to things that actually free our lives, that give purpose to our lives, that show us the better way of living. It limits our options, but that's a benefit. A fourth thing in these verses that I want to point out is that we have overcome the world. I think too often today, believers in Christ, Christians, are still struggling with this. We feel overwhelmed by the world. We're struggling with how do I deal with, or how do I handle, or it just seems too much. But the passage says we have overcome the world. It has no power to overcome us. Yes, life can be difficult. Yes, life can be a struggle, but you have victory. because Christ had victory. In our daily lives, the Greek is a little more clear on this than the English, but the English still gives you a good enough view. It says, we have the overcomes the world. You notice that that is a present active indicative. This is somebody that is always in the process of overcoming. Does that feel like your life? That it's not a done act. You're not ever completely finished wrestling with the world and winning. Does the world not wrestle back? Yeah, but we're those who overcome in the process of overcoming. It's a continuous struggle. We keep on conquering the world. But every time we wrestle with the world, when Jesus is on our side, we win. Every time. It's when you try to fight the world without him. It's when you try to set your own schedule and agenda and do it your own way, you're going to have trouble overcoming the world. But this passage reminds us we've overcome it. And it focuses on Jesus has overcome. You notice there's a change in tense there. Even when you read it in English, it's a stated fact. He has overcome. In Greek, that means it's an aorist tense. It's something that happened in the past that continues to have action today. Our faith is tied to his action of overcoming. We can overcome. We're in the process of gaining victory because he already won. The next section of the text draws our attention to Jesus and the testimony that Jesus is the Son of God and our need to acknowledge that truth. So we're going to pay attention to the testimony that John presents as well as the need to accept the conclusion of that testimony. In these next two verses, or 6 through 8, we have the testify section. This is the one who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ. He did not come by water only, but by water and blood. And this is the Spirit who testifies, because the Spirit is the truth. For there are three that testify, the Spirit and the water and the blood, and these three are in agreement. I'm going to stop there because there's enough going on in here, and it can seem a bit odd, so we're going to consider what's being said. There's a bit of commentary debate about he has come by water and blood. The way that that's constructed seems to be two separate acts, two different times, rather than some people want to take this as the spear in Jesus' side, and that flowed out water and blood, but that was a single event. It seems like the image here, because of the false teachings that Jesus was not fully man and fully God, is referring to his baptism in water and by the crucifixion, the shedding of blood. That is more likely what's being talked about here. And did the Holy Spirit testify at both of those events? Yes, we have the dove, we have the earthquake, we have the miraculous events that happen at the crucifixion. The Spirit testified at both of those events. Then there's a text note on verse 8. If you look at your Bible, or if you look at even at the guest Bible, if you look down at the bottom, it says the Spirit and the water and the blood, and these three are in agreement. But there are late manuscripts of the Latin Vulgate that have this extra writing. The problem is that extra section was never part of the text. Not likely. It was added in later in order for people to focus in on the Trinity. The passage isn't about the Trinity, it's about the testimony. But it seemed like a good idea to talk about Father, Son, and Spirit and link them together. But you'll notice that most translations, newer ones included, do not include that as part of the text note. It is worth noting because somebody might quote that passage to you and you wonder where they're getting it from. But it is part of older manuscripts, newer manuscripts, not the oldest manuscripts, if that makes better sense. So, getting back into the text. Who should they believe? Should they believe the Gnostic teachers, or should they believe God himself? Well, John says you always got to go with God. Believe in God because God's testimony is valid. It has three witnesses, which is why he points that out. In the Old Testament, could you testify just by yourself? No. You have to have, it's corroborated by other witnesses. So the Father, the Son, the Spirit, the blood, we read of these as extra testimony that says that God's word is true. God's testimony is valid and reliable, and the Gnostics are lying. They are not telling the truth. So let's pick up at verse 9. We accept man's testimony, but God's testimony is greater because it is the testimony of God, which he has given about his Son. Anyone who believes in the Son has this testimony in his heart. Anyone who does not believe God has made him out to be a liar, because he has not believed the testimony God has given about his Son. And this is the testimony God has given us, eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. There's a few things to pick up in here. One, the construct of verse 10 is a bit awkward to handle. But in that, the NIV for that, anyone who believes in the Son of God has this testimony in his heart. So I was looking through the background of this. It doesn't say in his heart. It says in himself. Other translations will use that. And made him out to be a liar. So I was looking, well, okay, who's the liar in this? How are we supposed to understand this? It's a little awkward the way that the NIV has it. Anyone who does not believe God has made him out to be a liar. My mind wants to put a comma. Doesn't yours? Anyone who does not believe, comma, God, comma, has made him out to be a liar. Or anyone who does not believe God, comma. There's a couple different ways of going at that make the sentence say completely opposite things. Well, the New Living Translation says, all who believe in the Son of God know in their hearts that this testimony is true. Those who don't believe this are actually calling God a liar, because they don't believe what God testified about his Son. That's what the passage is talking about. If you don't believe what God says about Jesus, you're saying that he's lying. Is that a really good position to be in? To call God a liar? No. But that's what these false teachers were doing. That's the danger that they were bringing into the congregation. But then we get to the last couple verses, which are powerful. God's testimony is valid. In verses 11 and 12, that's a reminder of the importance of accepting the testimony to accept Jesus. With him, what do you have? A blessed eternal life. Without him, you will not. With him, without him. And he's warned us in advance. Isn't that a loving God? The warning is there. With him, he who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son does not have life. That's a truth that people don't necessarily like, but it's a truth nonetheless. When we consider chapter 4 and 5, one of the values of reading in context and studying an entire book is we could have just picked our favorites. And I think if we did that, most people would select chapter 4 and leave out chapter 5. People like the truths of chapter 4. Who doesn't like God is love? Right? That stuff sells. That works. You can tell people that at any time. But when you get into chapter 5, we like to think of God as a loving God, and John tells us that that's true. You can go to John chapter 4, and that might be your favorite passage of the Bible. And it's true, but it doesn't end there. The truth doesn't stop there, however, for too many. For too many people, chapter 5 is less palatable, but it is true nonetheless. We must love God in the ways that he calls us to. We don't get to make up our own ways. You love God the ways that he calls us to. What did he say? To love God is to love Jesus and love his other children. Love the adopted children and obey his commands. It comes down to those basics. We need to honor Jesus as the Son of God. Love the family of God by being an active part of the church. Know his commands. Is it going to be hard to obey them if you don't know them? Yes. So spend time to know the commands and be obedient to them as we stand against the world and overcome it day in, day out, because Jesus has given us the victory. Keep your life centered in Christ. So how do we apply this? Well, I'm going to suggest a few ways. Refocus. One of the ways that chapter 5 can get away from us is that if we don't focus, if we get distracted into other things. Refocus on the spiritual aspects of life instead of the physical. Get first things first, or they don't fit. Center your life in that relationship with God. Then add other things. Invest. Invest in your relationship with Jesus. He is to be our first love, and I was reminded to say those words to him. Loving Jesus helps us in so many ways, doesn't it? But any relationship takes an investment. Invest time, invest focus, invest energy. Know his commands. And trust that his way is always the better way. He's always right. I'm 97%, I would think. 50. Okay, let's not talk about my percentages. But God is all... I almost made a mistake last night. It was very close. Are God's commands found throughout the Bible? I'll show you a few of them. This is a printout. Every one of these verses has the word command in it. Just so happens there's 364 of them. You get one day off. There's 364 times in the NIV that it uses the word command. That's throughout the whole Bible. Some of those don't have anything to do with living a command, but that God commands something. But there are still 62 of them in the New Testament. So, if you don't know them, how do you live them? Sometimes there's a value in taking a look. Overcome. It's not a great word. Overcome the world. You don't have to be mean about it, but you have victory on your side. Overcome. Realize how strong the pull of the world is and stand against it. We do that by knowing our strengths and knowing our weaknesses. Know where the world kind of has a leg up. If we were doing wrestling, you would know where your weak spot is. You know where it's going to get you and defend against it. We do that also by sharing our lives with one another. It's not just your strength. It's the strength of the group. I don't think we can get into chapter 5 without this one. We have to share the good news. If verses 11 and 2 are true, if 11 and 12 are true, if it is, if we have the Son, we have eternal life, without him we do not, it's a call to be witnesses. Remember in Acts 1:8, they were called to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. It got to us. Where does it go from us? Because the harvest is ready, the workers are few, we have a mission to go in his name, Matthew 9:37 and 38. We also have the Great Commission, in Matthew 28:18 through 20. God has called us to take the truth that those with Jesus will be blessed with an eternity with him. Those without are not. Somebody in your life is struggling with that. Share the good news. Accept their decision, but share the good news. And the last thing is, find ways to actively show your love to God in planned and spontaneous ways. You're good at loving other people. Try the same sort of things with God. Surprise them with a little date time. Surprise them with a, hey, I just want to have a conversation with you. Things that are planned and things that are unplanned. And how about this? And tell him. I think he likes it. Do you think so? Talk to God and say, I love you. For what you do, for who you are, for the way that you bless me, for the future that we have, for the good and the bad. You're so loving. What else am I to do but ask others to love you too?